The release of Alfonso Cuarón's film Gravity in 2013 launched a cycle of films and television series concerned with space travel. These have thematic similarities, including the depiction of climate change on Earth contrasted with the vast possibility of outer space, human movement and survival in zero gravity, and the characters' vulnerability and disconnectedness from their home planet. I'm going to explore how these films produce a unique kind of affect using camera movement, camera positioning, and sound to untether the viewer from a feeling of safety and stability to manipulate the haptic experience of cinema. In many cases, by emphasizing the character's removal of a tactile experience, or making the rare moment of connection more poignant. Space travel films emphasize the vulnerability of the characters by constructing a sense of isolation, untetheredness, being out of reach, and being exposed to and at the mercy of the elements. Early film scholarship was centered on what Thomas Elsasser and Malte Hagner call an ocular-centric paradigm, an emphasis on the eye, our visual sense as our primary access to film. In the last few decades, film scholars have initiated a turn towards exploring the viewer's sensory experience of film. As Elsasser and Hagner point out, this turn towards theorizing the senses contrasts with earlier theories of cinema, in that earlier theories were predicated on the assumption of a distance or separation between film and spectator. In contrast, considering the senses as part of the cinematic experience highlights the interplay, continuity, and transition between film and spectator. Vivian Sobchak points out that until quite recently, contemporary film theory has generally ignored or elided both cinema's sensual address and the viewer's corporeal material being. Laura Yu Marks calls this sensual address haptic perception or haptic visuality. In haptic visuality, the eyes themselves function like organs of touch, she says. It refers to the way we experience touch on the surface of and inside our bodies via cinematic images. Space films engage our haptic perception in numerous ways, but importantly, they work to renegotiate the usual haptic experience of cinema. While films set in the terrestrial space of Earth often work to engage the sense of touch, space films frequently show the characters deprived of tactile connection to replicate their disconnection from Earth. Of course, tactility is experienced through our skin. In space, our skin is no longer our outer protective shell as it is on Earth. Skin takes on a different value in space. Elsasser and Hagner argue that skin negotiates and redistributes the relation between inside and outside. It designates a transitional and uncertain liminality with respect to where the self becomes the world and vice versa. In a diegetic world in which the characters are in an alien environment, the boundary between themselves and the world, i.e. their skin, takes on an even greater importance than on planet Earth. Frequently in space films we see characters protecting themselves, using other objects as protective exteriors, whether it is a spacesuit in order to breathe or a hibernation pod. As early as Ridley Scott's 1979 Alien, we see the crew members being released from their hibernation pods in the opening scene, another protective shell, with their vulnerable exposed skin underneath. The film Passengers repeats this rebirth from the hibernation pod in its opening scene. These scenes normalize and domesticate the alien space they have woken up into, but they also position the characters as vulnerable. In both Alien and Passengers, this rebirth marks the beginning of the realization of threat for the characters. These protective devices evidently have a practical function, but without them, the character is framed as vulnerable, even within the safety of the spaceship. At the end of Alien, we see Ripley, again vulnerable in only her underwear, instinctively dash to hide herself in a spacesuit to protect herself in her second skin when she encounters the alien on the escape pod. The viewer is encouraged to perceive a sense of safety at the beginning of this scene, replaced with vulnerability as the alien appears. Both affects are motivated by Ripley's exposure to her environment. Once inside their protective shells, the character's capacity for tactile engagement is removed. Close-ups of characters shielded behind their glass helmets proliferate through space movies to highlight their fundamental disconnection from the world. And crucially, these close-ups, and very often the diegetic sounds of the characters breathing in the suit, allow us to experience this disconnection from the world along with them. These close-up shots replicate the claustrophobic feeling of being inside an unwieldy suit. The deprivation of touch marked by the donning of the spacesuit is communicated palpably to the viewer because of the inextricable relationship between touch, emotion, and memory. For Marx, senses that are closer to the body, like the sense of touch, are capable of storing powerful memories that are lost to the visual. The spacesuit itself, in other words, engages our memory and reminds us what it is like not just to touch, but to have touch removed. The removal of tactile connection is emphasised when we see them frequently reach out with their spacesuit-covered hands and try to grasp objects, knowing that their sense of touch is completely removed. It is these moments that reconfigure our haptic experience of the film. They are some of the few moments of touch between the characters, often accentuated through close-ups, but the characters' disconnection from each other is made palpable through them always being just out of reach. More than any other sensory deprivation, Marx observes, the loss of sense of touch creates a feeling of being an orphan in the world. During the production of Gravity, the sound recorders placed contact microphones on the objects encountered by the characters to produce the dull, echoed sound as they came into contact with one another. Physical tethers proliferate through these films, if only to demonstrate how tenuous the connection between characters is and how easily this connection could be lost. Such moments accentuate the potentially disastrous outcome as the characters float through space, completely untethered before being subject to the full force of the tether pulling them in the other direction. After such a long period of no tactile connection to anything human, the force of the tether against their spacesuit marks a distinct moment of relief for both the character and the viewer. The tactility here is equated with safety against the backdrop of the distant planet behind them. In recent space films, the skin as a liminal barrier between the inside human world and the outside alien world is constantly present in the juxtaposition of the soft human skin and the harsh, often metallic world around the characters. The director creates a haptic engagement through the use of texture and material, placing the human against the alien to accentuate not only their vulnerability, but their difference from their alien environment. The character's untetheredness is further emphasized through sound. In space travel films, sound negotiates the connections and disconnections between characters. It is a significant catalyst for character emotion, standing in for the tactile connections made possible on Earth, but impossible in space. Particular uses of sound produce the affect of relief, exemplified in the poignant moment in The Martian, seen here, when Matt Damon's character Mark Watney first hears the voices of his rescuers after 18 months of isolation and is overcome with emotion.
I'm anxious to get up to you. Thanks for coming back for me.
Well, we're on it. Remember, you'll be pulling some serious G's, so it's okay to pass out. You're in Martinez's hands now.
Well, tell that asshole no barrel rolls.
Copy that, Mav. Capcom. Go. Remote command.
Go.
Recovery.
Go.
Secondary recovery.
Go.
Pilot.
Go.
Conversely, sound is also used to mark the beginning of isolation, shown here in Gravity when George Clooney's character, Kowalski, is visibly drifting away from Ryan and instructing her to let go.
Ryan, you copy?
I'm gonna take the Soyuz and come get you.
No, you're not.
I'm coming to get you.
I've got too much of a head start on
I'm
you.
coming to get you.
I'm afraid that ship already sailed. Ryan, you're gonna have to learn to let go.
But
I want to hear you say you're gonna make it. Come on, Ryan, say it.
I'm gonna make it.
Space travel films are, of course, about the experience of isolation, vulnerability, and a disconnection from the familiar. But these films also draw on haptic visuality to explore these themes through formal means beyond the narrative. Space travel films engage the senses by offering the viewer an experience of disconnection and vulnerability through sound, close-ups, camera movement, and even costuming, as we've seen. Each of these contributes to the images of characters at the mercy of outer space, increasingly untethered.